Hello, everyone, and welcome to 180 Degrees of Impact. My name is Matt Scott, and today I'm thankful to be joined by Annalisa Bergh, who is
Hello.
with me right now, next to me, maybe on this side, possibly. But how are you doing?
Good. How are you doing? Thanks for having me.
Good. I'm happy I could have you. And I kind of want to get into all that you're up to. I know the 100 Degrees of Impact audience probably doesn't have context on it yet, um, but we're going to dive into a lot of different things. I think one thing that's worth saying before getting started is that the reason I know you is because I know our friend Eric Dowd, who I interviewed almost a year ago for 108 Degrees of Impact. And so it all comes full circle. There are a lot of connections, but
A lot of full circles.
I'm glad that we could finally connect. Lots of full circles. And uh, just to dive in, like, I would love if you could start up by introducing yourself to the 180 Degrees of Impact audience.
Sure. So my name is Annalisa Vandenberg, and I guess I have a background in graphic design. I went to school for it at the Rhode Island School of Design. And nowadays, I kind of like to call myself a visual journalist, kind of finding new and oftentimes visual ways to tell stories. I guess I can talk about like a few of the projects that I've been working on. Last summer, I biked across the country and I took a picture of the people that I met along the way in a series called Miles of Portraits. And this collection is kind of like a celebration of the ways that the bicycle brings people together and the people that you wouldn't have otherwise met driving a car. So I guess I can talk about that in a bit. Another So Eric and I are actually taking that project to Alaska this summer. And another project that we're working on there is writing a photo essay for Adventure Cycling's in-print magazine called Adventure Cyclist, where we're going to tell the story of our adventure through the blood sugar graphs that we use to manage our type 1 diabetes.
Oh,
And I
wow.
guess I should mention what type 1 diabetes is for people who don't
Yeah.
know. Basically, it means that our pancreases don't work, and your pancreas is supposed to produce insulin, which turns food into energy. So as a result, we have to basically do all the work for it by monitoring our blood sugar and either using an insulin pump or insulin injections. So we have this system called Dexcom where we can see what our blood sugar is every 5 minutes, which is amazing. I'm like very glad that I live in 2018 where there's technology like this around. So I'm excited about this trip because we're going to be able to kind of tell the story of this journey through those graphs and kind of the ups and downs of our trip and the struggles and triumphs of this disability that we live with every day. So I'm interested in kind of finding new ways to tell stories.
Yeah, you and like everything that you're doing is a lot in line with probably things I would honestly ideally be doing with my life at some point. I love what I do, but like at some point I would love to be able to like travel across America. I don't know about biking. I'm not sure if I'm
You
a
should do
biker,
it. Anyone can do it.
yeah, we'll see. Anyone could do it, but yeah, it's interesting because I feel like looking at you mentioned being a journalist of sorts, and like that's kind of what I feel like I am through 108 Degrees of
Mm-hmm.
Impact, asking a lot of the questions. So I don't know. It's fun that we have that in common, and I
Yeah.
feel like I want to learn more and dive into that a lot. But I guess one of the questions to start, and I know that I'm sure you've talked about this a lot, is
Mm-hmm.
like, how do you even get up the nerve to like bike across America and to do all the awesome travel that you're doing?
Sure. So there are a lot of reasons, but the main one is my mother's death, actually, a few years ago. So right after college, I interned at this online magazine called The Bold Italic in San Francisco. And so it was kind of in that midst of the transition between college and like real life, where I got the call that my mom was in the ICU, and I had to kind of experience this nerve-wracking flight from San Francisco to New York. Um, where I came in and I saw her unconscious in the ICU. Obviously, these were like the worst weeks of my life where I watched her, like, she got better, she got worse, she got better, and eventually, like, they had to stick the breathing machine back in. And I just watched her, like, lay unconscious. And just experiencing that nightmare made me realize, like, just basically having all these flashbacks of her back in the hospital, like a few weeks later and months later, made me just like want to take advantage of my own health, and like the fact that I was able to do something crazy like this, and this ended up being like the best decision I've ever made, just because like just the power of doing what makes you happy after grief definitely helps. And yeah, it's hard to put into words like why it's so therapeutic for people who are grieving to cycle. But there were just moments where I was like in Kansas and I would like look down at my legs pedaling, and I would just realize that like, wow, like it was my own energy that pushed me here. Like I'm in the middle of the country, and kind of looking at like opening up Google Maps and looking at where that blue dot has taken me, and just just realizing that it was my own energy that brought me there, and that I was like really making the most of life. So I know it sounds like a cliche, but it's just it's true.
No, it makes perfect sense to me, and it's always important to give context on these things, as you've done so beautifully so far with T1D. And like as mentioned, I lost my dad early last year, in March of last year, so pretty recent compared to I know when your mom passed away, and like that's a topic that I've been thinking about a lot. Just having some sort of trauma and then taking that trauma and then turning that into something. And like one term I've heard for that is post-traumatic growth. So like it's just interesting to hear from you that you were inspired in that way, because I'm seeing a pattern in the people I interview. Like there are a lot of people who've experienced some sort of trauma or realization that life is limited, and then they like out of nowhere almost do some really awesome thing that I end up interviewing them about. So
it's kind of crazy that like we wouldn't have done these life-changing adventures if it weren't for like this shitty thing that happened to us. Like it's kind of weird to think about.
I mean, what would you be doing if you you would be in an office, I'm assuming? You would be working?
Yeah, I think I would just be, well, I was actually laid off like a year and a half after my mom died. So that kind of opened up the opportunity to do this more. So, but yeah, I think I would have been working in an office, and actually following the bike trip, I freelanced at different offices around the city, and just experiencing that juxtaposition of watching office workers just eat lunch at their desk and sitting in a crammed subway, and just like realizing that like I don't have to be here right now. Like there's a whole world outside, and like and I'm stuck in this subway car, and like I can do something about it. So not that so I'm freelancing now. I'm a graphic designer, and in no way have I like figured it out. Like I still have moments where I don't have stable work. But I just think that it's like, if you're able to, I just think it's worth like the risk of trying.
Yeah. And I think it's cool because I mean, when I look at you and all that you're doing, one, I know that you're like mid Kickstarter mode, and I'll be sharing this like ASAP so that people can hear about that. But also like what you're doing is incredibly inspirational. When I first met Eric and heard about his story, I was like, that's cool. But then when I hear about you, I'm like, okay, Eric. So I'm assuming Eric actually probably, maybe he won't watch this, maybe he will. Like this, what you're doing is a lot cooler, just seeing like the different intersections of I don't know, challenges I could relate to. One with type 1, just knowing Eric's experience, and then like also in terms of grief, and then this idea of capturing people's stories. And so I actually want to kind of get into that piece of it and the impact you're having with telling people's stories. And I want to know why was it so important for you to kick off Miles of Portrait while you were biking across America, and to tell people's stories in that beautiful way?
So I started, so actually 10 years ago to this month, I started my first bike trip across the country from Seattle to New York when I was a teenager. And that was like the highlight of my life. And that's kind of part of why I decided to do it again. But my favorite part of that trip was just the people and like the kindness that we received across the country. And it just made me want to kind of set out and capture them more professionally this time around, which is what I set out to do. But I've just found that like riding a loaded bicycle, I actually weighed my bike in Missoula, Montana. It was like 83 pounds.
Oh, wow.
Someone called me a hoarder on wheels.
Did they call you that to your face, or was it like
Yeah,
someone called the
I had
cops
just
and
actually
said,
shipped some stuff home, and this guy just came around and he was like, "Oh, you look like a hoarder on wheels."
wow, that's a
but,
first. Yeah.
um, but yeah, just like riding this loaded bicycle, it's kind of like riding this conversation starter and this spectacle. Um, you're so exposed, and people are so interested in what you're doing, that like everyone approaches you and everyone talks to you, like everyone asks you your life story. So I kind of decided to turn the question around on them and take their portrait and kind of have this collection of portraits across the country to show kind of just the kindness that there is across the country, despite all the bad news that we hear. And yeah, I wanted to tell the story of like flyover country and middle America.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You've mentioned just some of the benefit of doing that in terms of like experiencing the kindness in our country up
Mm-hmm.
front. And again, I could relate to that in a different way with a slightly different demographic of change
Mm-hmm.
makers when it comes to 100 degrees of impact. But like, I'm wondering, what were some of the things that you learned in the process of capturing people's stories through miles of portraits?
Sure. Yeah, I think I was kind of afraid going into it that I wouldn't find enough people that were like willing to have their photo taken. But I just found, like, I like to think of the bicycle kind of as my lens of storytelling, because it's, as I mentioned, like it's this conversation starter, and it kind of opens the conversation with people because they're already so interested in what you're doing. So yeah, I was surprised at just how many people were willing to have their photo taken, and just like the kinds of people that I met along the way.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I can mention some of them.
Sure thing.
Like there was this cattle rancher at a gas station in Virginia, who I was talking to him for a few minutes about my story, and um, we parted ways and I started biking. And like 3 miles later, he pulls up next to me on the side of the road and he hands me a tenderloin biscuit and $50. So it was funny. And he said that he wanted to give back, which like sometimes I think people think that we're homeless.
Right.
We're kind of on that line between, yeah. But I thought that was funny. Um,
Right.
and there's like this family in Kentucky. I was asking them for directions. They were just having lunch in their backyard, and they just invited me in for a slice of pizza. There was one of my favorites was actually we met a sibling team that was raising money for type 1 diabetes, and they were going in the opposite direction. They were also biking across the
Oh,
country.
wow.
Yeah, and so Justin is the one with type 1. He was low on Dexcom sensors, the sensors that we use to monitor our blood sugar, and I was low on insulin because it had gone bad, and so we just had this trade in the middle of nowhere in Kansas. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man, it's
And
so interesting to like hear the stories of the
yeah.
people that you're connecting with, and I it's so hard to wrap your head, or at least for me, it's hard for me to wrap my head around
Yeah.
like all of the people you're meeting and all of the stories that you're exposed to, because I don't know who said this to me, and it's probably a famous quote, but like we are the sum of like all the people that we surround ourselves with,
Mhm.
who we meet in our lives. You know, you have all of those stories in
Yeah.
your head, which I think is really awesome. And I think it's even more awesome that you've decided that you sort of want to have like a round two to that journey.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like again, that seems really tough to bike across America, to actually go to ask to take pictures of them. Like, why is it that you're motivated to do it again? And could you tell me more about what you're looking forward to in this next upcoming kick-started journey?
Sure. So the reason why I want to keep biking is, as I mentioned, like I feel like it's what makes me the most happy. Bicycle touring is just like, I find it to be such a liberating way to travel, to just like use your own power to go from A to B. And yeah, like when I started doing it, my mom actually, the way that I found out about it was that my mom signed me up for this organization called Teen Treks that runs these kinds of trips for teenagers.
Right.
And after that first trip from Buffalo to Toronto, I just like, it didn't even occur to me that you could like use your bicycle to go to such far away places. So after that, I was just obsessed with it. So that's why I want to keep going, just kind of spreading the glories of bicycle travel. And I'm really excited about Alaska. The reason why I actually found out about it was that I applied for Lael Wilcox is an endurance cyclist. She's raced across the country and like all over the world. I think she biked the Trans Am, which is 4,300 miles. She did it in 18 days, which is crazy. It's like 250 miles a day.
Yeah. Wow.
But anyway, she's from Alaska, and she has this women's scholarship that she put up a few months ago that I applied for, where she would fund one woman's journey, like 1,000-mile journey through Alaska. And I applied for it, and I promised myself that even if I didn't get it, I would go.
Yeah.
And so I told Eric, and he like was pretty quick to jump on.
Yeah.
So I'm really excited to go because it's just this, they call it the last frontier. It's like this faraway state that I've never been to. The state is like, I think it's half the size or a third of the size of the US. But just the idea of like biking into the night, the sun like barely sets in the summer, and just having that freedom of being able to bike for so long. And just like the landscapes and the people, I'm really excited about.
Yeah. Are there pieces of the journey that you're like most nervous about or hesitant about? Even though, of course, as I keep mentioning, because I'm still in awe, you've done a massive journey. Is there anything where you're just kind of hesitant at this point?
Yeah, I think parts of our ride are definitely going to be more remote than what we've experienced, even though we've experienced like the Great Plains, which can be really monotonous. And there can be, I think the longest we went was like 90 or 100 miles without services. So I think we'll experience something similar in Alaska. But I think what I'm most afraid of is the bears and just being prepared for if that happens, and like having the bear spray ready, because it's like one thing to have it, but like there's no point in carrying it if you don't have it next to you. And just knowing like what to do when you see a bear, and like, yeah, making loud noises.
I'm just in awe a little bit thinking about what you just said, because like, sure, I would be afraid of bears too, but I and many others would also not go anywhere near bears. So I think just the fact, like, I don't know if you realize this, but you kind of just said, like there's nothing bears. I'm nervous, but just make yourself big, make loud noise,
Yeah.
whatever.
I mean,
I don't know. That's kind of cool that you're actually willing to potentially like confront a bear.
yeah, I mean, it's definitely confronting my fears. Like when I was camping in Yellowstone with my friend Taylor, who was on the bike trip with us. Yeah. And I just remember it was like 2 a.m. and I had to pee so bad, but I would not get out of my tent because I was just too afraid that if I did, like while I was peeing, a bear would approach me.
Oh, God.
But I heard Taylor get out of her tent, and I'm like, all right, if she can do it, then I can do it.
Otherwise, on the topic of like your fears, really, like, I'm wondering what the biggest challenges of, well, not just of the trip, because bears are a challenge of going outside, spending so much time outside, camping outside, so on and so forth. But like, just in general, what are some of the biggest challenges of that like lifestyle that you're living with biking and design and work from bike and miles of portraits? What comes up?
Hmm. I think one of the biggest challenges that Eric and I experienced on the cross country trip was just like covering all these miles, but also finding enough time to like document what we wanted to document and
Yeah.
like having the downtime to really put it out into the world. Um, I think, yeah, sometimes we were just rushing, and I know that Eric had like he wanted to put up more blog posts, but it was just like parts of it were too rushed to even deal with it. So this time we're really going to give ourselves time in Alaska. We're going to be there for 5 weeks, and we're going to do 2 loops out of Anchorage. So we really have like Anchorage as our base camp where we can like work on our projects. But yeah, just giving yourself more time. Definitely. I think that's what we learned and not rushing.
Yeah, that sounds like a good life lesson overall. And I feel I'm horrible at that. I think I don't know, like especially living in a city, because I know now you're in New York. Like that's
Yeah.
probably what a lot of people go through, just like speeding by and going through the motions, possibly, but not taking the time to stop and actually document the journey. Which is why I'm
Yeah.
really glad that we're recording this conversation, obviously. But
I was actually, oh, sorry. Go
yeah.
ahead.
No, please go ahead.
I was born and raised in Manhattan, so it was like literally like the center of the universe where there's just like all these office workers and tourists just like running around all the time.
Yeah.
And it gets really stressful. And I'm glad that I don't live in Manhattan anymore because of that.
Oh wow. I think I probably got uh like the I don't know what to call it, like the aura of that Manhattan kind of vibe growing up in I grew up in northern New Jersey in West Orange, New Jersey, and yeah, and now I'm in DC, and I feel like there's still that kind of thing where it's like go, go,
Hustle and
go for a while.
bustle. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I've been places where people will just slow down, and one day I'll go back there, but not today. Today I'm happy in DC without bears. So
Definitely no bears in DC.
no bears, or I hope not. It would make the news. Actually, the
Yeah.
zoo is just down the street, about
Oh, really?
10-minute walk. So there are some bears there, but other than that, I think I'll be pretty good as long as I stay out of like the bear enclosures.
I think you'll be pretty good at the zoo.
I think I'll be good.
Yeah.
But like one thing, so you mentioned Eric, and a question I had just as follow up is, I know Eric is part of the journey, of course, that you're about to go on and experience with the bears in Alaska and everything. But I'm wondering, like, who have some of your other like biggest inspirations or supporters been in the process?
Sure. I guess on the cross country trip, something that I didn't mention was kind of the trail family that we form along the way and all the people that we meet. I think a lot of people like say, oh, I can never do what you're doing. But I like to tell them that there's this whole community of people along the Trans Am, like basically every walk of life. People do it straight out of college, but a lot of people also do it when they retire and when they have more time. So I think just forming that community. Eric and I actually have like trail parents. Their names are Doug and Donna. I don't know if he's mentioned them to you.
Oh, yeah, I know all about Doug and Donna. Wow,
You do?
it's been a while since I heard about Doug and Donna, but I do know about Doug and Donna.
Yeah, but just like leapfrogging across the country with all these groups that we met. Like there's this group of veterans that were sponsored by this organization called Warrior Expeditions, and it's an organization that puts veterans on trips like these because they believe that just in the power of like adventure after PTSD and the power it has over it. So I think they were like my biggest inspiration, just like the people that we met along the way and the trail family that we formed, and just seeing how like people from all walks of life are doing this, and they all have their own reason for doing it.
Yeah. That's cool. And I think it's interesting to think about like veterans and just I know this sounds really broad now that it's coming out of my mouth, but veterans in time, because like for both of us, we're still young. We're kind of
Mm-hmm.
just living life now, but hopefully someday we'll have the opportunity to be like them and look back. I don't know how old these veterans are. Maybe they were young, like Iraq War veterans, but I'm assuming they're older. So, um,
Like 30s, 40s, 50s.
yeah, so a little bit older than us.
Yeah.
Not as old as I was picturing in my head, to be honest. I think I might have been thinking like Vietnam War or
Yeah, no Vietnam vets, but
just to that point, I'm curious. And one of my last questions, really, in this conversation, is that if when you're maybe not in your like 30s, 40s, 50s, but like when you're looking back at your life at some point, maybe you choose to retire. Um, you know, if you're writing a book about your life, or if there's a documentary being filmed about your life,
mm-hmm.
what would you want the title of that to be and why? Or what do you think the title of that should be and why?
Mm-hmm. So there's this word that I just heard a lot. It's just the word someday. Like everyone is always saying like, oh, when I have the time, like when I have the money, when I retire, like I'll take on this adventure like someday. And I think the name of my documentary would be like Screw Someday or something like that. To think of a better name, but something with someday. Just because like going through this nightmare with my mom just made me realize that like our health isn't a guarantee. And I think Eric says that a lot. But like, I know that it can be a cliche to say that life is short, but it's true. Like you don't know how long you have. And if you can help it, then you should do what you want now.
Yeah. I guess to that point, I love that title, and I hope someday forgives you for saying screw someday. But no, and like in all seriousness, I agree with that, and I guess I have like kind of like a two-part follow-up question.
Yeah.
In that there are, at least in my experience, there are people who kind of are on the boat with that, and then there are people who can't really see that. Like you could tell them that life is limited and health isn't a guarantee, but they don't necessarily see that. And so I guess part one of my question is, what advice do you have for people who are with you and say screw someday? And then what advice do you have for people who kind of don't necessarily appreciate their time yet?
Yeah, I think it does, like, unfortunately, it does take, like, going through something traumatic to realize that. Like, I feel like, or even just having, like, I have type 1 diabetes and just realizing that, like, it's a fragile condition and you really have to look out for yourself all the time. But, yeah, I think, like, sometimes I'm afraid that I sound privileged when I say that, like, saying, do it now. And then like, there's a lot of people who can't afford to just drop everything and live their dream.
Right.
But I guess I'm just talking about like, if you do have the power to do that, or if you live under the conditions where you can try to make that happen, then you should.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And then for the people who, I guess, what would you say for the people who don't yet appreciate that their time is limited? Because I think a lot of people might hear you say that, or might hear this conversation, and then they kind of just go back to their day-to-day lives.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, I guess I would tell them about like my mom's story, and like, no matter how hard that is to say, like, I think it's really powerful to just tell someone like the traumatic things that you've seen and why they made you realize that like, our time is limited and we don't, like, health is not a guarantee.
Yeah, I think that's one thing I've found through 180 Degrees of Impact, through my work. Otherwise, that the most impactful thing is not just telling people, your perspective, but really sharing why you feel that way and sharing your story or the stories that you've experienced. And that really helps get other people on board. And so, but I also think that that's something really important to mention within the next 2 weeks. Father's Day is happening, which for me is like a difficult day, or like a special day in a way. And I think a lot of people I've met, I'll tell you one thing is that I'm a community moderator for um, Option B's Facebook group, which
Mm-hmm.
is like based on the book by Sheryl Sandberg,
Right.
who's the Facebook chief operating
Mm-hmm.
officer. And a lot of people are very stressed and hesitant about like talking about like the trauma that they've experienced
Yeah.
because they feel like they're a burden on others. They feel like they're going to drag others down. Like they'll be the friend who everyone tries to avoid at some point,
Yeah.
that
It's
sort of
like a
thing.
conversation killer sometimes.
Yeah,
Bring it
yeah,
up.
like the
Yeah.
like the buzzkill of
Yeah.
but I feel like it's so important to still like recognize that you have space and you deserve to be able to share your story, and you've done that so brilliantly
Thank you.
already. You've already done that so brilliantly for so many people through Miles of Portraits. You're continuing to do that, and you're doing it on 180 Degrees of Impact, which I appreciate, and I'm glad we've had this conversation. If people want, so like to get to the
Oh,
Kickstarter,
the Kickstarter. Don't forget the Kickstarter.
should have mentioned that at the beginning. I'm wondering, like, where can people learn more about you, your work, and about the Kickstarter, and why should people donate to the Kickstarter?
Sure. So the name of the project is Miles of Portraits, and if you want to see like all the portraits that I've taken on my bike, you can go to milesofportraits.com. And if you want to see the Kickstarter, just add /Kickstarter, and it will direct you to the Kickstarter. And if you're able to pledge, which we'd really appreciate, there's several rewards that you can get. So for $20, you can get a magazine of all these portraits, either from the America trip or the upcoming Alaska trip. For $90, you can get like a 3-print series. And then within those rewards, you have early film access and like access to sneak peeks of the film that Eric is going to focus on during the trip. So yeah.
Awesome. I'm excited. I still need to donate. I know when the
Oh,
Kickstarter closes, I'm just thinking to myself, like I'm
no,
just
you've given us so much exposure. Like I'm
uh,
so appreciative.
oh no. I'm happy to be part of it, and I feel like more of a better way to be part of it is to like actually have those magazines in hand and to see the film early, because I'm excited to see it and to hear about your journey. But uh, you know, I'll stay in touch. By the way, social media. Where can
Yeah.
people follow
Oh
along on
yeah.
the journey on social media?
I'm mainly on Instagram at Annalisa VD Bergh. That's ANNALISA VDBERGH. I have a long Dutch last name, but that's my Instagram. And then Miles of Portraits has its own Instagram. It's just at Miles of Portraits.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, if anyone wants to learn more about 108 Degrees of Impact, they might already know where to find it because they're watching this video, but it's www.lets.care, or lets.care is the website, at Let's UK on social media. I'm at Matt Scott GW on all social media. And so thanks again. This has been awesome talking with you, and I appreciate you taking the time out, especially as I know that you're like probably mid-packing for this journey.
It's
So,
crazy. I have like 2 weeks left.
oh wow, okay, yeah, this is happening.
No,
So,
but it's happening.
yeah,
Things are
but it's
moving. Thank
happening,
you so
and
much.
you're gonna do an awesome job, and I'm just glad that I could be associated with you through this interview right now, because this is gonna. It's I know it's gonna. You're going to really be inspiring a lot of people, and you're going to continue to make the impacts that you're making. And thanks for being part of this again.
Thank you so much, Matt. Really appreciate it. It's great
Awesome.
being on.
Awesome. And for what I say at the end of every interview, for anyone who's watching,
Uh-huh.
keep impacting, like with the finger point.
Finger point. Keep impacting.
Keep impacting.